The New Boy by Doreen Tovey. Chapter 1. There was nothing that last summer to warn us of the sadness that lay so short a while ahead. True, Sheba had been ill the previous autumn. Kidney trouble, the vet had diagnosed after examining her. And when he told us gently that she was now an elderly cat, that her kidneys were very much enlarged, but that with treatment and careful diet, we might, if we were lucky, have her with us for another year. We were numbed at the prospect of the future without her. For 13 years, life in our West Country cottage had been dominated by a pair of Siamese cats. Sheba, the clever one, tiny, blue-pointed, and as fragile as a flower. Solomon, her noisy brother, seal-pointed, huge, our bumble-footed clown. Every inch of the place held a memory of them doing something. Sheba playing tag with us on the coal house roof on a summer's night, for instance, hanging over the edge, bawling she was here. We weren't to go in without her, or the foxes might get her. And then, as we reached up to lift her down, retreating light-heartedly to another corner, saying, "Ha-ha, that one fooled us, didn't it?" She wasn't afraid of foxes. Or Solomon, dark-backed and seemingly as unmoving as a doorstop, peering stolidly through the gate when he knew we were keeping an eye on him. Always the adventurer was Solomon, never within our boundaries if he could help it. And on the occasions when we had to go out and were watching him like security guards to make sure he didn't get away, wipe a plate, out to check on him, put away a jug, out to check on him again, there he'd be sitting by the gate, very ostentatiously with us, not a thought in his head about moving. Why on earth, inquired the set of his back view, were we watching him like that, and waiting, as well we knew, to vanish like Siamese lightning the moment we took our eyes off him? One day, of course, we would have to lose them. The one disservice animals render us is that they don't live as long as we do, but cats live longer than dogs. We'd heard of Siamese of 20 and more, and not only had our two, until Sheba's illness, gone through life with the enthusiasm of eternal kittens, but it seemed such a little while since they had been young. I could reach out, it seemed, and almost touch them like it, going down the lane at 3 months old with their mother and their brothers in the wheelbarrow, all the others in the wheelbarrow, that is, and Solomon tagging tearfully along behind. Lying on our bed at 6 months old, when Sheba had recently been spayed, and when we switched on the light, wondering at the peculiar snicking noises, there was Solomon, mortified at being discovered, helping her by trying to bite her stitches out. The first time we took them to the Siamese cattery at Hulstock, after their mother had died, and, as we left, they'd sat side by side in their big paved run, wistfully watching us go. They had the tips of their tails crossed, like children holding hands to give each other courage. They'd done that, said Mrs. Francis, every time they sat out in their run. 13 years had slipped by since then, May mist blown by the wind. The cats were 7 when we acquired an 11-month-old donkey, and now Annabelle was 7 herself, as wayward as ever, and there was no need to worry about her age, thank goodness. Donkeys lived to 20 at least, and we'd been told they could live to 40. I worried about the cats, though. Being the world's worst pessimist, I always had done. I worried when they were ill. I worried when they were out of sight. When Solomon was out of sight at any rate, for Sheba very rarely strayed. I ran like a deer at the sound of a cat fight, in case the loudest, most urgent of the house should be, as they usually were, Solomon, having started the fracas, bawling for me to come to the rescue. Sometimes I ran when it wasn't a cat fight, bursting through the door, shouting, "Solomon!" as I went, only to find that it was a boy who lived on the hill, practicing bird calls, or visitors to the valley calling their dogs. Embarrassing though it was, it didn't really bother me. I would have gone to the ends of the earth to rescue Solomon, to rescue any of them if it came to that. But particularly Solomon, who was not only more likely to be at the ends of the earth than any of the others, but because for me, he was something very special. I had never for a moment taken him for granted. In 13 years, I'd never once seen him come round a corner or into a room with that dawdling, elegant walk of his, without marvelling at the perfection of his beauty. He had the proud, high-boned features of the East from which he came. His face shone like dusky silk, and if his slanted sapphire eyes had faded a little with the years, they were the most loving, communicative eyes I have ever encountered in a cat. Beyond all that, he was my friend. If Charles went down first in the morning, it was Solomon who came flying up the stairs, stropping an exuberant strop on the stair carpet by way of exercise, and then, if I didn't acknowledge his presence, bumping his head against the door edge until I did, and raising his tail in affectionate greeting. Sheba, who was Charles's friend, would be out with him inspecting the garden, but Solomon would wait while I dressed, walk down with me, and only then go out. If I were missing of an evening, washing my hair perhaps and then drying it in the bedroom, it would only be a little while before there was a creak as he pulled back the heavy living room door, or, if it were latched, the sound of his demanding that Charles should open it, and up he'd come again, his face bright with joy because he'd found me, and wasn't it nice, his expression demanded, to be he and I together. It was indeed, but sometimes I thought with a pang of the future, 19 or 20 we told ourselves, but already he and Sheba were 13. What grief was I storing up for myself when we lost him, and what would I do when it happened? In the event, however, it seemed it was Sheba who was going to leave us, and if Solomon was my number one cat, Sheba, as I'd so often assured her, was my .999. It was heartrending watching her sitting about so wanly, while Solomon, doing his level best to get her going again, tore round the place like a spider-legged puppy. He shouted, he poked her with his paw, he invited her to chase him. She was ill, she informed him mournfully. Couldn't he stop making such a racket? She grew terribly thin and refused to eat. The vet gave her treatment and said we shouldn't feed her proteins. They were a cat's natural diet, he said, but hard on the kidneys. When young, a cat thrived on meat and fish. When old, it did better on the cheaper tin cat foods, and the more cereals they contained in her condition, the better. We tried 6 kinds of cat food, but Sheba wouldn't look at them, so despairingly deciding that the most important thing at the moment was to get her to eat something. We'd worry about the cereal business later. We returned to the foods she normally liked, dropped, knowing their habits of old when convalescent, in odd, seemingly accidental fragments in front of her, in any place where she happened to be sitting. It was a long time before it worked. It was Solomon at first who ate the bits, nose to the trail like a walrus whiskered bloodhound. Jolly good game this, he informed us enthusiastically. Got any more chicken scraps we wanted tracked down? But we got her eating in the end, on rabbit jelly, dropped, I regret to say, on the seat of a chair. Cats have these fads about feeding when they're convalescent. Solomon once, after a serious illness, consented to take nourishment only in the conservatory from the toe of Charles's shoe. Crab paste it was, I remember, and Charles swore that his shoes reeked for weeks. Another cat I knew fancied shrimps in the bath as a pick-me-up. An empty bath, of course. He wasn't that psychiatric, but nobody was allowed to watch him while he ate. The shrimps had to appear before him one by one, or the sight of them put him off, and his owners, I saw them myself, spent hours crouched low beneath the bathroom, tossing shrimps to him over the top. If anyone says how typically English that is, and it just shows what fools we are about animals, may I also quote an American friend of mine, a hard-headed writer of detective fiction who once spent the best part of a week on her stomach. Her cat, Robin, was convalescent and would only eat best minced steak under her bed. One book we read discussing this finickiness suggested dropping the food on pieces of paper. Humour them, it said. Try anything to get them interested. Often when they're ill, they won't eat from dishes, but they'll take food put on paper because it's unusual. Sheba wouldn't. On the chair, she informed us faintly. The one behind the door. It was the only place she felt like it. And if we didn't hurry up, the feeling would go off. So on the chair it was. And as I'd recently recovered the chair in tomato-coloured whipcord, an encouraging little spectacle it was too, until I had the idea of slipping a spare piece of material deftly in front of her and feeding the invalid off that. The identical tomato-coloured whipcord, of course, so she thought she was using the chair. When I tried a piece of towel in, she looked reproachful and once more refused to eat. So, on rabbit jelly mixed with glucose, Sheba slowly turned the corner. A more repulsive mixture one couldn't imagine. It was sticky and looked exactly like sicked-up sherbet, but from that she went on to the rabbit itself, and from rabbit to raw minced beef. And then one day, quite by accident, I discovered about pig's hearts. By accident indeed, for I thought I was buying sheep's hearts. I spotted them in a butcher's in town, thought they might tempt our invalid, and in I went. Sheep's hearts, certainly, said the butcher, clapping a couple of gory objects onto a piece of greaseproof paper. Sheba thought they were wonderful. She ate them with more relish than she'd eaten for years. She began to appear in the kitchen, demanding them noisily. She sat around looking hopeful, if I so much as got out the mincing machine. And then, after she and Solomon had been eating them for months, 2 a week between them, and they polished them off like wildfire, I went into the shop one day, said I'd have a couple of those sheep's hearts in the window, and the new young woman assistant said, "But those aren't sheep, they're pigs." They were too, which shows how much of a Fanny Craddock I am. Of course, I said they were sheep, said the butcher when I taxed him with it. I said they must say whatever anybody asks for. Saves disappointing people to my way of thinking. Most of them can't tell pig from sheep or calf. Solomon and Sheba could. Switched precipitately to lamb's hearts. Pork, we'd always understood, was bad for them. And here they'd been eating pig's hearts raw for months. They promptly went on strike. Horrible old grey fatty things, grumbled Solomon, shaking his leg disgustedly at his dish. Just when she was getting better, said Sheba, turning frailly away from hers. So after consulting an expert on cat dietics, who said there was nothing against pig hearts in his opinion, nothing particularly in favour of them either, unless it was that pigs were often given antibiotics, some of it probably permeated into the heart tissues, and in eating the hearts, the cats might themselves be getting minor doses of the antibiotic. We went back to them again. Only 2 a week, of course, along with fish and rabbit and meat. But our cats liked and thrived on them. Robin, in America, liked and thrived on them too. We gave up bothering about Sheba's cereal. The vet was right about it in principle, said the expert. But with an old cat, wasn't it better to let her eat what she enjoyed? Rather a shorter life by a couple of months or so than an existence on food she didn't like. So watching her closely, we continued. By Christmas, she was putting on weight. By spring, she was back to hunting. By autumn, a year from the time she'd been so ill, she looked right for 20 or more. Heartbreak was not far away from us, however. It was Solomon who died. Chapter 2. We had no inkling whatsoever. Sometimes he drank more water than usual, and I worried about his kidneys, but he always had done everything lustily, big drinks when he drank. Siamese drink lots of water anyway. Hearty meals when he ate, charging like a bull in a china shop when he felt like a chase around the house. We watched him nevertheless. Perhaps a little kidney trouble, we told ourselves, but if so, he'd had it for years. We couldn't remember a time when he hadn't. After an afternoon snooze in the car, come down, stood on the rim of the goldfish pond, and lapped a long and noisy drink you could hear the length of the garden away. But he wasn't always drinking, like Sheba when she was ill. Most cats get kidney trouble anyway as they get older, and so long as it stays slight, it doesn't harm them. So we reasoned and gave thanks for his seemingly boisterous health. He was heavy, his coat was sleek, he looked and acted like a cat who was many years younger. I have so many memories of Solomon those last few months. In the garden one day in spring, for instance, when it appeared that he wanted to dig a hole. The ground was hard. Charles and I, not being very home-minded, so to help him, I pulled out a dahlia cane and scratched the earth loose with that. Did Solomon get the message? Not the one I was intending anyway. He spied suspiciously down the hole in case it held a mouse. There was the time too when he actually caught a mouse. Charles had taken up beekeeping. The combination of 2 cats, a donkey, Charles, and a hive of bees had to be experienced to be believed, and of that I will tell more anon. Suffice it for the moment to say that beekeeping is not as easy as it's sometimes thought. We were always having crises and having to send for a bee expert, and this was one of the times. Charles had lost 2 swarms in a fortnight. Soon, he kept expostulating, he wouldn't have any bees at all. As far as I was concerned, that would have been a jolly good job. But there we were. The expert expected momentarily, Charles in the garden waiting for him, and Solomon mousing hopefully on the lawn. He'd been sitting there on and off for weeks in front of a clump of grass that grew over by the wall. He sat there when it was fine. He sat there when it rained. When it did, for fear of a chill on his liver, I took out a wooden box, turned it on its side, and in that, to the obvious surprise of callers, he sat deadpan before the grass clump like a sentry at Buckingham Palace. It didn't seem odd to Solomon. That was just when one night come out, he said. One hadn't, or if it had, he hadn't seen it. No mighty hunter was Solomon, though he tried so hard to make believe he was. And then, the very moment the bee expert arrived, he landed one, a whacking great-grandfather of a field mouse that probably couldn't get away, it was so fat. He lugged it to the middle of the lawn, eyed us forbiddingly over the top of it, and prepared to defend it against the world. Make-believe again, as well we knew. But through the gate right then came the bee expert, who was also a fervent animal lover, and the first picture he had of us, also animal lovers and pillars of the RSPCA to boot, was of a fierce, slit-eyed Siamese about to torture a mouse, and ourselves standing, apparently unheeding, by. "Don't you take it away from him," he demanded. "We did," I explained, "if it was alive. But this one looked dead. We were watching, in fact, to see if it moved, and if it wasn't dead, its rescue needed strategy." "On account of the cats so fierce?" asked the bee expert. "On account," I explained, "of the fact that we had for years been rescuing mice from Solomon by lifting him by the scruff of his neck gently, so that while his body and forepaws were in the air, his back legs were still on the ground. And that made him drop the mouse, and then we caught it. But Solomon had now got wise to that one. When we lifted him, he held his front paws out to catch the quarry himself if it fell, and As a further precaution, bit deliberately through its backbone the moment we touched him. It would be dead then in any case, I explained. So now we wait, see if it moves, and if it does and he lets go, we grab him before he can pick it up again. Solomon, as if to demonstrate, laid the mouse carefully on the lawn and looked at us. There you are, you see, dead, I said placatingly, at which the mouse got up and walked away. We would have saved it even then, but for the fact that, as we moved forward to pick up Solomon, the bee expert advanced as well. Solomon grabbed the mouse and eyed us dourly, playing dramatically up to the role of a panther retreating with his quarry. Always the water mitty was Solomon. He slunk, looking suspiciously over his shoulder at us at every step to the corner of the cottage. And there, as in attempt to show the bee expert that we weren't as black as Solomon was painting us, I threw caution to the winds and chased after him. Solomon, of course, killed it. That was bad enough. What was worse was that when the expert and Charles went off to the beehive at the top of the orchard, Solomon was tossing the dead mouse in an ecstatic Siamese ballet dance on the right-hand side of the lawn. And when they came back again with their mission accomplished, there was Solomon tossing another one on the left. It was no good pretending it was the same one either. The first one had been big and fat and a field mouse. The second was a tiny pygmy shrew. Not only had Solomon, the world's biggest duffer when it came to mousing, managed to, for the first and only time to catch 2 in 10 minutes, as Charles said starkly afterwards, he'd had to do it in front of someone who liked nature so much he wouldn't even wear gloves when handling bees. If they stung him on his hands, they might get away with it, he'd told Charles very seriously. If they stung into leather gloves, they'd lose their stings and die. So there we were, Solomon, mousing, tormenting Sheba, going for walks. It was only a few weeks before he died that the valley was flooded, and there was no sign of anything wrong with him then. It began with a terrible thunderstorm. Our cats, following our own example, took no notice of it, but up on the hill, Miss Wellington, as well we knew, would be heading for her broom cupboard, cats and all. I tried to ring her up to comfort her, but there was no answer. Daft old besom, said our neighbour, Father Adams, when he called with a sack over his shoulder and a gift of cabbages, and I told him about it. She takes a damn thing off the hook in case it gets struck. I noticed him turn up the hill when he left our gate, nevertheless, going up to be rude to her, no doubt, and to make sure himself that she was all right. Meanwhile, we put Annabel into her stable across the lane. Annabel, who takes good care of herself, poses like love-locked out on the hillside behind the cottage the moment it rains, and then stands there and drips disconsolately until we take pity and put her in. We lit a fire because, July or not, it was cold, and the sight of it was bright and cheerful. And then we went upstairs to watch the storm. We get tremendous storms over our West Country hills, and this was no exception. The rain fell in a drumming curtain, the thunder growled around the sky like a prowling lion, lightning flashed like scimitars around the horned Celtic camp on the hill beyond us. Solomon sat in the spare room window with us, I remember, and regarded it all with interest. It was Charles who first looked down and saw water coming under the gate. The bridge must be blocked again, he said. We'd better go down and clear it. The entrance to the cottage is over a bridge across a stream, a very small bridge under which sticks and leaves sometimes lodge and cause the stream to overflow. That wasn't the trouble this time, however. By the time we got downstairs, the water was fanning silently across the garden like a tide coming in over sand. And when we looked over the front gate, the stream was a rapidly rising river that filled the lane from side to side. Things happened quickly after that. We ran for corrugated iron sheets, spare roofing for Annabel's shed to barricade the gateway. But even as we got the front gate blocked, the water came through the drive gate higher up the lane, and poured in a wide red waterfall over the terrace wall. Our first thought then was for the fish pool down in the lower yard, which would be flushed out like a saucer under a tap by the surging force of the flood. "The paving stones!" yelled Charles, inspired. We'd just had a load delivered to finish making the driveway, and so we couldn't stop the water reaching the fish pool, we knew, but we hoped we might break the force of it and prevent the fish from being swept away. There we were, calf deep by now in muddy water, frantically standing paving stones on end around the pool, when Mr. Penny came wading up the lane. We must have looked queer to him, but he looked pretty queer to us too, paddling debonairly along with his trousers rolled up and a big black umbrella over his shoulders. His wife was out visiting up on the hill, he said. He was going up to tell her not to bring the car home. 5 minutes later, and he wouldn't have paddled up that lane. The stream, with water pouring down from the hills in all directions, was now a raging torrent, with boulders bouncing down in it like ping-pong balls. For the first time, we began to be worried. Was this really happening to us? And what could we do now that it was? Too late, we realised we were cut off from Annabel. Between us and her stable on the other side of the lane now roared a fast-moving conveyor belt of angry red water and bounding rocks. Not only could we not have stepped into it without being swept away, but if we had, by some miracle, kept on our feet and avoided being hit, we certainly couldn't have brought Annabel back with us. She would have panicked and probably drowned us all. Feverishly, we worked out 2 plans of campaign. The one for Annabel was that if the water rose any higher, we would rope ourselves on a long line to the back gate, get across the torrent as best we could and hope to dodge the boulders, knock out the side of her stable and get her to the high ground behind it for safety. To that end, Charles got the rope from the garage while he could still get the doors open, carried it wherever he went, and I, floundering behind him in waterlogged gumboots, tripped over it regularly all night. The plan for ourselves and the cats was that we'd retreat, if necessary, to our bedroom, put Solomon and Sheba into canvas holdalls. Their baskets were already marooned in the tool shed with the door unopenable against the water, climb out through the side window onto the conservatory roof, and thence to the hill behind the cottage. We and the cats would be on the hill, on one hill, and Annabel on another, like goats on opposite Alps. But at least we'd be reasonably safe. Always supposing we could get back through the torrent from Annabel and the glass held in the conservatory roof. Fortunately, it didn't come to that. The telephone went out of order, lightning hit a transformer near the cottage, and the valley was plunged into darkness. The water went on rising until, in the kitchen, which is raised some way above the yard, it lapped ominously like a high tide round a pier at the top of the last retaining step. Solomon came out just then, surveyed the candlelit scene from the top of the step, and held forth with indignation about this stuff which was in our kitchen. Another inch, and it'd be in the refrigerator, he complained. And what were we going to do about the food? Then he went back, no more concerned than that, to join Sheba in front of the fire, and almost as if he'd been Canute, the water began to go down. It rose once more after that, as a barrier of stones gave way higher up the valley, and we held our breath for a while. Then once again it subsided. There was still a fast-running torrent between us and Annabel's stable, but it was a foot now below the level of her doorway, then 18 inches, then 2 feet. At 3 a.m, knowing she was safe, we went to bed. At 6, we were up again to inspect the damage. The first thing I did was to go up and call across to Annabel that we'd be over to her soon, now that it was daylight. There hadn't been a peep out of her through the night, and we hadn't dared call her in case, hearing our voices, she'd tried to break out and come to us and been swept away immediately in the darkness. But now, hearing and seeing me across Ferobis, she let go of her pent-up feelings. Woo, 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 bawled Annabel. And never have I heard such relief in a donkey's voice. Why she kept so quiet, we couldn't imagine. Probably thought the Martians were landing, suggested Charles, and being Annabel, didn't want them to know where Annabel was. And that's where I'm going to leave it.